Good evening. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us this evening. And those of you who are joining us for the first time, a very special thank you. A special note to my regular audience. This is a bit different in our scheduling. Usually it's twice per week. But I felt it was important and necessary to do a tribute to a great leader, one like the world might never ever see again, Nelson Mandela. And tonight I have two guests, two special guests. One is a member of CWS, Kojo Parris. Some of you might have seen him on my program before, and Kwanele. Tonight, I wanna thank you for your kindness in tuning in. I am especially moved by this opportunity. Here I have two people who are thousands of miles away, but in a different time zone, who stayed up early or woke up early to share this moment with us. And so for that, I am very grateful. The last two nights I spoke about, in my introduction, about Nelson Mandela and what he meant to me, or still means to me. I don't believe that I will ever say enough about this great man. I remember him as a child, as a schoolboy. I remember the countless debates we had as children in high school about apartheid and the many atrocities and the injustices against people, black people or people of color per se. I remember when he was released. I remember how that made me feel. I was playing a little bit of Miriam Makeba earlier because I cannot ever think of Nelson Mandela without thinking of Miriam Makeba, who sacrificed so much for the struggle, and his former wife, Winnie Mandela. So I'm not going to spend too much time in my monologue. I just want to take a moment to explain to you, the new listeners, what the goal of CWS is. On CWS, we have conversations with people about their journeys. How are they using their gifts and talents to help others? How are they making a positive contribution to humanity? And with that, I'm always looking for people, especially ordinary people, doing extraordinary things. And because I believe that each of us has a story, it is not the successes or the success in a person's story that most appeal to me. I love success. I encourage it because I attribute success, or I think of successes as beacons of light that should not only illuminate the person who is successful, but illuminate all of us and shine on us so that everyone can realize or find their own switch or realize that they too can shine. But what I especially like about stories are the challenges, how someone overcame their challenges, how many times they fell down and they got up. That to me is a powerful compass, a powerful beacon, because it tests our humanity, it tests our resolve. And the man we are paying tribute here tonight was such a man. 27 years, incarcerated, everything that is attributed to a free person stripped from him, yet he persevered, yet he got out and forgive his enemies and pursue reconciliation, not for the benefit of himself, because he had made peace with himself, from what I've read, but for the benefit of his country. And from that gesture, the whole world benefited from that. And we can tell from the many tributes that we have heard as the world mourns these past several days. So I'll take a break, and when I return, I'll introduce you to our two guests. We are back, and those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. The folks next to me is Kojo Parris and Kwanele. I'm going to try your name, Asante Shongwe. Am I correct?
Well done. Thank you, Selwyn.
You're welcome. Kojo Parris is Guyana's consul to South Africa and founder of the Roraima Fund, among other portfolios. Kwanele Asante Shongwe has an LLB at the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, South Africa, a BA Honors Interdisciplinary Psychology and Sociology, Wesleyan University, Connecticut. I'd off by asking you this. What would you say is the current mood of the country, and what plans do either of you have to commemorate his life?
We all knew that our beloved statesman, Tata Mandela, would pass, but somebody described it as still a shock. And the mood is very somber, but at the same time, people are celebrating a life with a life well lived. And I must just in advance say to the audience, please bear with me. This is a difficult personal time because I've had to spend time reflecting on what he's meant to me personally, but what he has meant to my people as a Black people previously oppressed. We'll talk and we'll ease into it, but it is a moment to say farewell to a man who restored our human dignity as Black people, and a man who is so loved by the world for his moral courage and what he stood for.
I think someone, Kwanele is especially as a South African, has really hit the nail on the head. The only thing I can add to that is to say that perhaps there's also an element of what comes next. Because although we expected this, we've been in many respects preparing for this. We hadn't thought carefully enough about the day after, and we're living in the day after.
There seems to be a lot of mixed emotions with the populace celebrating and mourning. Do you think Tata's passing has helped to bring the people closer?
I think his passing is going to offer us, or is already offering us, a moment of, reflection is a word that I'm going to keep using. As Kojo is saying, we knew this moment was coming, and we are having to transition. We are a people that now has to define who we are post-Nelson Mandela, what his legacy was about, where this country is going. There is a lot that's unsettled in this country at the moment, and I think some of it reflected a bit during the memorial service, the public mourning, where you have this, let us pay tribute, but we're also unsure which direction we're headed, and we need to redefine where we're going, especially with the elections coming up next year.
And again, there's just a little bit I want to add to that, Selwyn. From the distance of being a non-South African living in Southern Africa for some while, it sometimes occurred to me, and still occurs to me, that Nelson Mandela meant very different things to very different groups. And part of his genius was his ability to offer people some sort of social, emotional refuge in his own work and his own life. And so people were able to buy in to the South African project in ways which weren't necessarily the same. So, we were sometimes driving on the same road, but not necessarily headed necessarily in the same direction. So I think that's part of the uncertainty with his physical passing, although we must point out that Nelson Mandela hasn't been an active feature in the South African body politic for some time now.
Mm-hmm. And talking about that, within months of his release in 1990, Nelson Mandela was able to commence the healing of South Africa and then the eventual transformation of this country from a shattered nation to a spirit of unity. Do you believe that unity was fully accomplished?
Wow. We have that beautiful phrase, the Rainbow Nation. And I think, personally, this is our Kwanele personal views, that the rainbow had started losing some of its colors, the shine, the beauty, the cohesiveness of our society because of the growing disparities, socioeconomic disparities. So you have this beautiful historical legacy of this great leader, and I think we have all set in deference to him. Mandela is still alive, and he has been this big symbol in our history, and I think a lot of us have not spoken out. With the funeral, with the passing, there seems to be, very strangely, people are going back to old wounds. I listened to the music you played, Mama Miriam Makeba, and that music just evokes so much of the pain of where we have been as a people. Mm-hmm. And the question at this moment is, have we reached the proverbial promised land? How much has been attained in the 20 years that we have been a free society? How is it that we have so much material need and increasing intolerance, it seems, from a black government to allow people to speak freely? We have Marikanda. So we've had unfortunate, painful incidents that have mimicked where we have come from. Mm-hmm. And the passing of our beloved leader gives us that moment to really start asking hard questions. At least that's where I am personally, and that's the mood that I have observed amongst people my generation and people younger. So you have those of us who were alive to know the history of the music, to connect emotionally. And then you have the so-called, and I use the term so-called very deliberately, born-frees. If you're Black, South African, 20 years old, and you are born free, are you really born free if you're still languishing in poverty? On the flip side, you have increasing growth into the middle class of a very small section of the Black population who don't necessarily share the history of dislocation that, say, a young person in the townships, the informal settlements would feel. So it's a very dynamic period mm-hmm. to be here.
Yeah. Salman Mazafa, you asked some pretty insightful questions, and listening to Kwanele's answer and thinking about my own thoughts about it as someone, as I mentioned before, who's lived in the region for a while, but that wouldn't have the same emotional connection that say, Kwanele would have. Mm-hmm. What for me is interesting is that the Mandela period has provided, or did provide, potentially the opportunity for South Africa to really take a deep breath and space to reflect and almost as the sort of that period you have when in a relationship you had a fight and you're trying to decide whether or not to reconcile or how to reconcile. Mm-hmm. I think in many respects the last 20 years has been that sort of period. Yeah. And I think the real challenge is less to do with Mandela and to do with each of us individually, and to say, well, how have not only have we used the spirit, what have we gained from it? What have we taken from this space which was provided? For me, one of the interesting things about that period is, it was, South Africa is dubbed the Rainbow Nation, which is perhaps a little bit unfortunate, Selwyn, because the colors in the rainbow never meet to infinity, and I think what we're about to enter into is that period where we have to rely a lot more on ourselves and our experiences rather than falling back on the Mandelian miracle, so to speak. So this is, I think Mandela offered us a period of reflection, like, the job of any venerable African leader in this community, which is to say, come, let's huddle around, let's see if we can work this out. And now we have to grow up.
So in essence, he created the fireplace. For those who live in cold countries, that's an appropriate metaphor, or the market square or the village square, and then it is up to the people, the community, to come together, to gather around, reflect, and then go back into their own respective places and do, what they develop themselves or do what they feel is necessary to take the community forward or take it to a next level.
And keep the fire going.
Keep the fire going.
So that we don't start freezing again. I love that imagery of a community gathered around a fire.
Talking about
and the fire is, burning out a little bit. And Kojo says it very beautifully, that it's now up to each one of us to realize that we have personal responsibility to put a new log to keep the fire going, because we need it for our individual, but communal and collective survival, whether in the South African context or African context or broader.
Well, the thing with Mandela that we often probably don't pay much attention to is how relevant and resonant his message was, not just in South Africa and Africa, but globally. Issues around tolerance, for the first time, and for me, this is the amazing thing as a African diaspora and living in Africa and living in the world, is that here was this example being shown by an African as to how peoples, not just African peoples, can reconcile, can use the pain of the past to forge a different future. And we've had examples historically where, conquering peoples or communities would simply annihilate those who were quote unquote conquered. And he controversially, in some respects, said no. There's another way, and we can debate, and there will be debate as to whether or not the Mandelian way was the best way for all the stakeholders. But he certainly forged a new approach which the world, Africa, and even us in our individual lives can now explore as a way of not just settling conflict, but creating a new future.
So how talking about the Mandelian way, how do South Africans and other Africans and blacks around the world build on this Mandelian rainbow legacy?
I love that Kojo brought us to the differing views of what his legacy is and if his style of conflict resolution was necessarily what we want. What I would like us gathered here to reflect on is the gift he has given us is exactly what we're doing at the moment. That we are a people so far away, and via technology we gathered today around the log fire again to reflect on what he meant. And for somebody who's South African, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, but for him, I didn't have this right to speak my thoughts freely and to express where I'm going. the issue of voice as a black woman, as a black African, within my local context, be it in Soweto, taking it to the national, to the African, to the global space. I'm very grateful for the sacrifices that Mr. Mandela and his generation of ANC and PAC and all the other people who were key in the South African struggle for human dignity, because that's what it is, and the right to define who you are as a person in your own terms. And for me, that is the most beautiful gift we've been given as people of African descent in the diaspora or anywhere else in the world.
You know, Selwyn, the question raises one which, I must be honest, I never really thought about until Mandela died, and now I've sort of flipped and spending a lot of time thinking about, so what exactly does this mean for me, for groups, the people I love, the community, the world, or whatever. You know, and one of the conclusions I've come to, and I'm sure if you ask me tomorrow it will be maybe slightly different, is that I want to look at Mandela's life, and in the way I would look at the life of a revered elder, and say, what is it that I can take from his life, personally to start with? Is it the humility? Is it the sense of humor? Is it the statesmanship? What can I take from his life so as to enrich mine and make me a better individual, a better friend, a better partner, a better father, so as to improve my life and by extension the life of those around me. And I think that must be a minimum start, really. And because we can only make the world a better place if we become better people. And as someone who is increasingly focused on the issues that how do we improve our communities, it has to start with self.
Yes.
So what can I take from the Mandela character, the Mandela myth, to do that? You know, some of the more the grander visions, etc., I think can wait. But right now, for me, the issue is what can I extract for me?
You know, it's interesting that you said that. That has been part of my reflection in recent days. What can I take from this this many pages book that he has given to us? And there are so many. And the other day I was looking at some of his quotes, and very insightful, very deep, very profound. And I what a rich legacy he has left us. There are two points I considered on his passing, is that, and this is just personal, a reinforcement in the belief of reincarnation, and it may be selfish in that I would love for his spirit to remain with us, to come back in someone, so that the world can experience many more eras of such a rich and brilliant and gracious person, be it a man or a woman. That spirit should not leave us at all. It's too bright a light. It is too instructive a light. It is too comforting a light. It is too stimulating a light to just be doused and, you know, and end up on as an epitaph. I don't believe that. The second thing is that came to mind is it slips me right now, but I'll remember it later on. But there are two things, that and something else. Immortality. The thing why immortality comes to me is that, you know, we so often think of mortality as the physical and it's dying, but in his spirit, the spirit to me will never die. We will celebrate this man. We continue to celebrate him, and his essence, his spirit will continue to live through us. History will make sure that we do not forget Nelson Mandela, and generations, I believe, are going to echo what this man has done, his journey and his legacy. So mortality the idea, the concept of mortality, of immortality, visited upon me, and so I attribute that to Nelson Mandela. That here lies, or here is, an immortal soul. So that's just my piece. Kwanele, as the founder of Breast Sense, a breast cancer advocacy nonprofit you founded in 2007, how challenging would that have been during apartheid?
You know, we go back to the issue of voice and the social location of Black people within the South African social context during apartheid. I am absolutely grateful because I know but for him, I would not have the voice that I have. And thank you for the reflection on immortality. I was diagnosed with cancer myself, and I have been sent home to die a few times. So Mr. Mandela passing, when I heard the news, I remember just sitting on my couch and sitting in a space of gratitude for his life and my life. Then proceeding to reflect on the fact that I am here amidst the poverty of Africa, amidst the great social need of people similarly placed, women with breast cancer, Black women with breast cancer specifically, to know that I am alive because I have access to treatment. In the context of Mr. Mandela's passing, invokes in me a much deeper, I started in 2007, but I sit here today knowing that my calling has started in earnest, because I feel a very strong sense of moral obligation to advocate for access treatment for those who are not privileged like I am to access medical care. The right to life, which is ultimately what he was about, should not be based, whether or not I live from cancer or any other life-threatening condition, should not be based on my geographic location, should not be based on my gender, should not be based on my race. And I feel very passionate about it, that I don't confine my work to people of color in this country. It goes to the continent, it goes to African Americans who live with disparities, it goes to people from the Caribbean nations, because we have huge cancer disparities around the world. How do I, as Kwanele Asante, start using my voice and the legacy of Nelson Mandela, the human rights, human dignity legacy, to make sure that people have just what is a God-given right to live?
I love to give beyond oneself. That is perhaps one of the greatest gifts from one human to the next. To give without expectations, and to give because we must. What is the pulse of the South African people as they and the world mourn Nelson Mandela's passing? What sense do you get is happening?
In a sense, we got to go back a while. I think, Nelson Mandela's had. Someone made a very interesting comparison. When Kennedy died, it was a very instantaneous, traumatic event for the American people. So you had this huge outpouring of grieving. People were absolutely, shocked into almost immobility. Nelson Mandela, in a sense, like the generous soul he often was, provided us with, and probably much to his own suffering, a period over which I could almost hear him saying, my children, take this time to start getting accustomed to my not being here. I mean, Nelson Mandela, I think most of us knew at an intellectual level that he was gone probably a year ago. But we've had this period of adjustment. And if you recall right at the top of the discussion, we talked about him providing a period for South Africa for the last 20 years, or his work to come around that log fire, as you put it, Selwyn. Exactly the same thing, with his passing. I mean, he gave us an adjustment period, and for those who may not believe in the spiritual realm, they can't be more powerful evidence of it, because this giant of a man, this giant of a person, rather than us simply waking up one morning and him being gone and the trauma that would have probably visited upon us, has given us almost a year, to get accustomed to him not being there. So the impact is I think in many respects a little bit more muted than it might have been, if he died in a car crash or a plane crash or something traumatic like that. And very reflective, but at the same time, particularly I would say among Black South Africans, celebratory as it is in lots of times when someone of stature dies, because you celebrate their life. So it's this mixture of a sort of melancholy rejoicing, and reflection. It's quite, for me, it's been almost an honor to be in South Africa, and a privilege really to witness the sort of gracious mourning that's taking place.
Gracious mourning. That's an interesting way of putting it. Did you ever get a sense, Kojo, being there, that there was a sense of peace among the people, knowing that he was there, knowing that there isn't much violence, or, well, let me rephrase that. Let me leave it at that. Knowing that he was there, there was a sense of calm, a sense of peace, a sense of, we struggled. Our foreparents struggled for freedom. This man came out to give it to us. Do you think, did you sense that? And now, because I listened to what you said, there was this grace period, and it underscores my point about reincarnation, that this spirit should not be allowed to leave us. That said, this grace period, do you think it's like what is happening now, what you're noticing is happening, is like a pre-shock or stilling shock, and then when it settles in, that our father, our grandfather, our leader is gone, that there might be some other reactions?
Selwyn, and this takes us into the realm of the politics of South Africa, hey? So I must tread very carefully, particularly as this is a period of mourning. There's absolutely no doubt that Nelson Mandela, being alive, even in the most basic biological form, I strongly believe, and I've argued this for some time now, has provided a sort of socio-moral restraint on the way people express certain things. Kwanele earlier on pointed out that there's still a huge job to be done in terms of meeting the expectations, particularly of Black South Africans. And one can't help but think that him being there in one way or the other, in the same way that if you and your sister or your sibling, you know, having a fight at home, but you know your parent is in the next room, you know, you're going to keep it quiet.
Yes, of course.
But the minute your parents decide to go to work, okay,
I understand.
there is that potential.
Yes.
That, you know, the dispute becomes a lot more animated. And I think that's partly why, you know, if you remember, I referred to a little bit of apprehension, you know, because I think there is a natural sense of what next by the various communities. It's not clear that all has been done or all has occurred that might have occurred in this grace period to fully reconcile the various stakeholder groups and the various ambitions. So yes, you know, Nelson Mandela, I think, being biologically alive, even if not politically active, has served as a sort of socio-moral restraint.
Social moral restraint, social glue.
I like that. Let's take a quick break, Kojo. But before we go, Kwanele, I want to ask you this, and you can think about it during the break. How would you compare the pre and post apartheid workplace, and what has been his impact on black women's belief and confidence in themselves to accomplish great things? Fair?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Said, suffer the little children to come unto me. Every day, more than 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases. More than 300,000 children are being used in war as child soldiers. Lord have mercy. A child should be loved. A child should be held. A child should be clean. A child shouldn't smell. A child shouldn't go to bed hungry at night. A child should be taught wrong from right. A child should learn to say thanks and please. A child shouldn't suffer from preventable disease. A child is
We are back with Kojo Parris and Kwanele Asante. Kwanele, the question before the break was, how would you compare the pre and post apartheid workplace, and what has been his impact on black women's belief and confidence in themselves to accomplish great things?
There's that beautiful quote he gave. I don't know how familiar people are with South African history, where under apartheid we had H.F. Verwoerd, who was the Minister of Education, and he said the purpose of an education for a black person was to make them hewers of wood and drawers of water. And came along Mr. Nelson Mandela, who came with a vision of education as a tool that would allow a daughter of a mine worker to become the mine manager. And for me, this was particularly relevant because when I returned from studying at Wesleyan in the US, I had been away from home since '89, so I saw him released from Connecticut, watching a country in transition, and I was not home. And I went and voted in Boston. So I come back in '95 and I take a job in mining. And I was one of the first few black women coming into mining. And I am very blessed to have met Mr. Mandela in that context. And to see him look at me and congratulate me, I was about 27 at the time, for having made it into corporate South Africa as a mine manager. I was not the mine manager, but that I was part of the managerial team in mining. That remains a very endearing memory for me. And I've seen, it's been a very slow process, but we've had black women who previously were told you're not good enough and you'd never amount to anything. rise and become women of influence. And that is a very beautiful tribute to his commitment to gender equality. And if you look at the world at the moment, it's quite amazing that we have 4 Black South African women in charge of, the African Union. Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who was in Mr. Mandela's cabinet at some point. We have Navi Pillay, who is the Human Rights Commissioner for the UN. We have recently appointed Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka as in charge for the women's portfolio at the UN as well. And we have Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi at the African Development Bank. These are directly Nelson Mandela's women that he helped gain a voice, show their talent, and the tribute is so fitting because these women have gone far beyond South Africa to become global leaders. These are daughters of the soil who, under apartheid, were not deemed good enough to even have an identity document as women, simply because they were women.
Wow.
And to have that level of empowerment, for me, is quite striking. And you see it in other industries. Slowly but surely, we have Black women. I know that more of us, even today, or yesterday, I'm losing sense of time, when we went to Pretoria, to have Black women stand up, and the constant refrain is, "He restored my human dignity." We are equal citizens in this country. By law, there's still a lot of challenges, but we're protected and honored as people.
Let me go into the chat room for a moment. Ray asked, how do you believe it will affect most South Africans, especially Black women?
Sorry, we didn't hear that.
How do you believe it will affect, I guess it's passing, most South Africans, especially Black women?
So when we're sitting in a very difficult position where, you have that social transformation in terms of the women I have mentioned, but you have Black women being the majority of people living in poverty and impoverishment. President Zuma last year spoke of Black women facing the triple burden of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. So I'm very keen to see if Black women are going to reclaim that sense of freedom given by Mr. Nelson Mandela to assert themselves more and start saying, you played the music of Mama Miriam Makeba, Tula Mama Tula. Black women were the most active, and in my recollection of the struggle of this country, they were the most brutalized as mothers, having to mourn their husbands, their children, and things like that. So I think we need to go back and re-examine, have we done right by the Black woman in this country? Why is she the most oppressed person in post-apartheid South Africa, given what she sacrificed to bring us here?
And Jamie asks, what keeps you going? What drives you, Kwanele?
What drives me is just this fantastic sense of, I have finally come home. I have been feeling alienated from my society. My great state leader is now gone. It is up to me now, as Kojo said earlier, to take the movement forward, to what you are concerned about, honor his legacy and make sure that his work and all the sacrifices he made as a father, as a husband, as a person, all those sacrifices that he gave for my human dignity, I feel, I mean, I just have to point out, even my sense of dress has changed.
Wow.
Because I just feel so proudly Black, South African woman. And for me, that is the gift of Nelson Mandela. I know who I am.
Karen G said, so now we mourn and sift through the legacy. South Africa in 5 to 10 years. Your thoughts?
Maybe we have a woman president.
I like that.
And not maybe, but my thoughts, South Africa in 5 to 10 years, I would like to see the social equity in terms of material well-being, the promise of a quality education, the promise of a good access to healthcare. I would like to see the human condition of the Black people tangibly and substantively transformed.
I like that. And Kojo, Mandela gave South Africa freedom, but fell short of bridging the huge gap between white privilege and Black deprivation. Do you think his hands were tied, and how much of South Africa peace and prosperity, for all that is, depends in closing that divide?
Yeah, huge question, Selwyn, and you could have one of your entire shows, devoted just to that. A couple of points. I think it's in the nature of these sorts of huge transformational changes that the promises and expectations would always be unmet in respect. It's always going to be difficult to meet those expectations. So, for example, the issue around education and skills, it generally takes a generation, at least a generation, to transform the educational status and the sort of broad competences of any group of people. Now, we are less than a generation into the new South Africa. To answer your question more directly, I think that there's been a platform created. Certainly the last 20 years has been a platform for many of these things to be worked through. It's not clear to me that all the stakeholders have put best efforts to create this new society which everyone wants. Which perhaps means that we're going to have some amount of trauma as we go forward. And that in itself perhaps is not surprising, Selwyn. We've spoken about this, privately many times. There are lots of questions which need to be asked. And I'm deliberately avoiding answering the question directly, Selwyn.
I understand.
Because I think it's probably this point in time, while we're mourning Mandela, to not be too definitive about some of these matters. But I think there are lots of questions to be answered, and some of them are already being, people are already asking them, in fact. And going back to what I talked about, that South Africans particularly have been going through a process from around a year ago of mourning Mandela's passing or observing his passing. Some of these questions are emerging, and some of them, to which Kwanele referred to about what's happened to the promise. I think that's part of the question. That's part of the discourse now in South Africa, which Mandela's death, will now empower people to ask in much more direct manner, in a much more direct way.
If I may, I might take a strand from one of your explanation earlier about Nelson Mandela representing the fireplace or the market square or the village square. Let me say him starting a fire. I think it is up to others now to fan the flames and keep the fire burning. So it is good that he did what he did, right? It's like building a bridge. Some are on either side of the chasm. One side should not depend on the other side to complete the bridge. I think if both sides come together. So it is up to us now. Kojo, I like what you said earlier about taking snippets from his legacy personally and using it to remold, transform your character to be a better, different things, father, leader, business person, whatever the case might be. But saying that, go ahead, Kojo, you're going to say something?
Yeah, Selwyn, I told you offline the other night that I've dubbed you the Larry King of Brooklyn. I think I did you a great disservice because your turn of phrase is quite fascinating, and it's certainly not one that Larry King had or has. You talk about Mandela's role in bringing people together to build the bridge. It's so evocative, actually, and if you don't mind, I will use it in my conversations going forward. Because that precisely characterizes most appropriately what I think the last 20 years has been in South Africa. Mandela offered almost to be the architect of that bridge, but someone has to build it. And the question is, have all the communities, have all the stakeholders been willing or goodwill participants in it? And I think that's the big question, to be quite honest. And as I said, that debate will become a lot more vivid in the next, I think after Sunday, because it's not always clear that every community has embraced that architecture, that promise of that bridge across the chasm that divided the various communities. Selwyn, the South African story is yet to be written in many respects. And the Mandelian legacy really will be a lot about how the various communities seek to construct that bridge. There are lots of times when I get the sense that some have said, what, we've done our bit. We've built our bit of the bridge. We're waiting for you guys to come. And then some other communities will say, well, you can't expect us to give you the materials to build a bridge. You have to find your own materials. So that bridge that is South Africa, I think it's contested territory.
I like what you both say. I think at this moment it's a question of we're building a bridge to where. Where is our destination? And I like the image of people from both ends having to chip in. What has been the blessing of this passing, Selwyn and the rest of our audience tonight? A lot of the younger generation have not truly understood where we have come from. And with this passing, we've had the pleasure and the displeasure of having to look at old material, like the film of what happened, the historical record. And I think the younger generation is starting to say, is that where we came from? Was it that painful? So you have a people rediscovering ourselves, as you will. I described it earlier as coming home. He's bringing us back to where we have been, where we currently are. And the great challenge and blessing is for us, as you both are saying, is to decide, where are we building this bridge to?
So quickly, one of the things in some respects, as an observer of the South African situation, is that, and also partly for all sorts of reasons, moving between the various communities, be it for work or in the social sphere, etc. It has always struck me that the various communities in South Africa do not always share a common sense of where this bridge is being, what this bridge should look like, or how it would be built. I think everyone at an emotional level buys into the need to build a bridge, but who builds which bit of it? Who owns the bridge, if anyone at all? These are all contested questions to some extent, and people have been very polite to each other, certainly until now, and partly it's to do with Untata being there. Now that we will be burying him on Sunday, I rather suspect that the debate about the bridge will become a lot more evocative and a lot more animated.
Just to build on that a little bit, every time I visit the pages of history, what I realize that when there is a struggle, usually, and people come together to overcome the struggle or for freedom, there's usually a common thread, a common thing, and that is pain. When there is a common pain, people tend to come together and they fight collectively and they fight cohesively for their freedom. And so I asked this question in reflection: how much has reconciliation, the walk towards sitting down with the enemy and reconciling for the benefit of the larger whole, did we lose something? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because, based on what Kwanele said about the youth today who are not too familiar with the pain, has the narrative been interrupted? Has the historians, the village elders stopped telling the stories? Are the stories of those painful times, are they forbidden because this great leader had taken the country into this realm of forgiveness and reconciliation? Do you think that which is necessary as a fireplace conversation, as a village square conversation, not just for entertainment, but as a reminder, because there are other places, other regions of the world where people have suffered a lot and the story is never leaves the discourse. Do you think that was something that was sacrificed, and how important it is to reconnect that story or to reintroduce the story?
I think to a large extent, that's my sense, my personal sense, that, the nation building project, we parked our pain. And it's very interesting that in South Africa, because of this notion of a rainbow nation, this miracle nation, this triumphant nation, that people find it still difficult to talk about race. And I think we have now entered. We were starting to grumble, but very politely, as Kojo was saying about it. Whereas now we've had 10 days of somberness to look at ourselves honestly and say, did we go too far? Are we being too polite? Do we need to? And I think we need to do that, quite frankly, for us to make progress, to truly travel into the past, or into the future rather, because you cannot go forward without knowing where you have come from, and without giving those that were so traumatized an opportunity to speak freely and openly outside the fora of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We need social conversations around the fire.
Kojo, a mutual friend of ours, talking about building, Mutsa, said it this way: as you can imagine, South Africa is abuzz with activities, a real roller coaster of emotions. I am oscillating between deep sadness and illumination at the realization of what a great leader Mandela was, but also slight anxiety at the thought that this country is losing the best of its leaders. It is all really crazy, but what it has done is really revive my passion for nation building. I find myself asking a lot of questions about how you build a society with a strong and lasting moral and social foundation. So I ask this of you, Kojo. How do you build a society with a strong and lasting moral and social foundation? I don't know if it's an unfair question to you. You're not a social scientist, but there it is. Give it your best shot.
Sal, when I to answer that question, I have to ask myself, which are the societies which display the characteristics which you refer to? Nations aren't, and communities, successful communities, aren't necessarily. Great moral bastions, America is a great nation, but one might question the moral basis for America. So we got to be careful as to whether we're talking about building a moral society or building a great nation, because they aren't necessarily the same thing. They could be an overlap. And I think that the thing about South Africa is that given the Mandela legacy, given the Sisulus, the Tambos, etc., I think there was a sense in which people thought we could, or a great moral nation could be built. A nation which could use the pain of the past to really realize the promise of the future, the promise around communities living in equitable and harmonious coexistence. I think that was I think the rest of the world looked to South Africa and looked to Mandela particularly. In fact, Mandela came to embody that promise that actually we don't have to be immoral in order to be great, or we don't have to be weak in order to be moral. Can South Africa do it? I hope it can. I hope it can for some very selfish reasons, because it would be quite amazing for a predominantly black African nation to demonstrate to the world that power does not have to be accompanied by an absence of morality.
Two things.
And that morality, doesn't presume weakness. And that is why I think so many people are enthralled, black and white, Indian or whatever, are enthralled by the potential that South Africa represented in this sort of Mandelian paradigm.
So how do you think that post-apartheid has affected in a positive way the social ethos of other African nations?
Well, both at a sort of structural level, the Constitution of South Africa, also the presence of Mandela has always been used as a sort of whip, primarily by Western countries, but even the social movements, the civil movement, to say you should be like Mandela, we should have a constitution like South Africa. So it's really served as a benchmark for behavior and structure among among African nations or even among communities. That has, I must tell you, led to some resentment among some African countries, who believe that, that either their experiences are more relevant and more African than the South African experience has been, or that they haven't been sufficiently acknowledged for the role they played in creating the new South Africa. So there's, I don't know that it's been used as a whip, but it's also been a source of resentment.
There's a question that came to mind as you were talking about the moral fiber of a society, and society doesn't have to be immoral to be great, and is in respect to South Africa. I wonder, I think of this conundrum, or is there one, whereby the new ethos of South Africa seems to stifle the memory or suppress the memory of the pain, the painful past. And if the painful past is going to be an integral part of the formula for creating a better future, how is this going to be possible?
Let me answer just very briefly and make a point, and then I think Kwanele's reflections are perhaps going to be more relevant. One of what has always struck me about the South African model is how, in a sense, it differs from the post-Second World War model used in, say, Germany and by the communities, be it the Roma or the Jewish communities for their own reconciliation. It is almost in contradistinction to that. A very different approach, and as I said, in many respects, this was the perceived genius of Mandela, to create or to say there's another way. We don't have to have huge Nuremberg type trials, etc. Now, I think the real question, and if I could be presumptuous, what lies behind your question, Selwyn, is has this project worked? I think what I will say is that the project is being severely stress tested right now, and it's going to be up to leaders like Kwanele, etc., in South Africa to decide how this project evolves.
Stephen Biko, right? Perhaps I would say the Black consciousness movement's most famous martyr. That's argued that before Africans could take their place in a multiracial society or state, their confidence, and I only bring this up because Kwanele, I think, spoke about responsibility earlier. Their confidence and sense of responsibility must be rebuilt. Do you get a sense that this was accomplished post-apartheid, or it is in the process of becoming or being accomplished?
I think you bring back a very important leader. The social tone is changing. I think we're starting to move to, and I hope we're going to move to, a realization that forgiveness and nation building is not a denial of our pain. We need to bring that pain with us so that we remember and live up to his words where he says, never, never again will one person be oppressed by another. We need to keep the remembrance. Just quickly listening to the radio station from the memorial service, it was a call-in program, and people were being asked, did you feel that the memorial service, the official morning on Tuesday, hit the right button? It was amazing that about 10 people called, and 6 of them were saying I was not satisfied because I did not hear enough of the African voice. I did not see leaders like Julius Nyerere speak. I did not see Robert Mugabe speak. They were key to my struggle. They were key to it, which is what Kojo is saying. And this was being articulated for the first time publicly. I'm feeling very bitter that, you know, when we go, we all hope that when we go home and we take him to the village, to Kipunu, that we will bring more of who we are as a people, more Africans will speak and get off the international Western stage.
I don't remember where I read this article, but this word comes to mind. Now, this is what I remember from the article. This gentleman wrote it and saying, you will not strip him of who he totally was. You will not sandblast him and fit him into a certain mold. Do you get the sense that that is what was reflected in these people's comments when they called in?
Absolutely. The phrases that I use in people who are more socially conscious from the Biko, Sobukwe, Black consciousness angle is that take him back to his roots. You know, we perhaps should not have kept him to die in a white man's suburb. We should have left him to go die back home in the village. That would be the ultimate honor we would have given him as a people, given what he has given us. So people have said, you know, where is his praise singer? Where was, you know, where's the African music? Where is the singing, the eulogizing by the ordinary rural people that he so strongly identified with? He's given enough to the world stage. Let's give him back his Africanness as a final gift, his rural Kunu village send-off.
So tradition was compromised, you believe?
You know, someone, and hearing this from Kwanele to me is really interesting. I'll tell you why. Well, Nelson Mandela, as an idea, as a concept, you know, was he universal? Does that deny his Africanness? You know, it's interesting. And is this discontent which Kwanele is referring to really reflective of a more material discontent? I mean, if Black South Africans had their expectations met more substantially, would they mind that Nelson Mandela was so embraced and in many respects so much part of an international cosmopolitan ethic? You know, I think these are some interesting questions which only time will answer. I'll tell you what. I certainly thought that you know, being at the stadium, you know, for the ceremony, I certainly thought that there were too few African voices, too few Black voices, and I mean, yeah, it was quite fascinating. It didn't feel particularly African, you know, or what I can't claim to know what African is. I'm a visitor here in many respects, but it certainly didn't seem to resonate with the sort of Africanness I'd become accustomed to seeing displayed. And you know, these are interesting questions, you know, which the authorities here, I think, will have to address as we go forward. You know, one of the things I felt strongly about, and I feel strongly about, is that here's a guy who's given his life, you know, the best years of his life to the world, really, and to a cause. And I do think, to be quite honest, there should have been more time for his family. To be quite honest, I mean, for example, the burial in his rural home really should not be open to the, you know, I think, to Angela Jolie and that kind of crowd. But you know, it's not my call.
And he was the glue that held many facets and factions of South Africa together. I remember how he embraced, I think, Buthelezi, the leader of the Nkatha, into his unity government, and finally quell the violence between the ANC and the Nkatha. What do you believe is the fate of this brokered peace now that Madiba is gone?
Solomon, it's I'm not in pointing out that South Africa has the highest level of micro social protests in the world. I think it's three or four. There are three or four community protests every day in South Africa, you know, on one level or the other. In pointing that out, you know, some might say that actually all that's happened is that these massive conflicts are now taking place in small configurations all throughout society, you know. So to some extent, that brokered peace never really, the flames of that protest never really died. They were well managed, and I think the apprehension felt by some of us is, now that the socio-moral restraint is gone, what happens next? I don't think you'll find a sort of massive configuration between, you know, Nkatha and ANC, etc., you know, at the scale which was suggested at independence. In fact, I never really thought it was that realistic, to be quite honest, but, you know, I'm not an authority on these issues. I think the great fear going forward is that, from my perspective and from what I see, is not a great big battle, but lots of, but the society being lots of fires, bigger fires, you know, rising in society, and that sort of atomization. I don't think there's a chance of coming a huge civil war. No.
Yeah.
Feel free to disagree.
The fires are starting in small places, but what has been alarming for me in the past year is that the tone is very similar to my childhood of anti-apartheid fighting, and it is quite telling to see the old songs of the freedom struggle being sung against the black government by black people. Where to? From here, there's a song, Hasim Bonanga Mandela Tina, which is Isizulu for "We didn't see Mandela," because he went on the island and most of us grew up without him, and we're never allowed to even see an image of him because he was banned, a banned person. I was in Pretoria yesterday for the viewing. We were there for 7 hours. We did not manage to view because of the logistical bad arrangement. Here were buses full of black people not able to pay final respects. I mean, how ironic that South Africa's first black president lies in state in a city that actively persecuted him. And 20 years later, his black government that he gave his life for does not have logistics suitable enough for his people to see him. So to hear myself and other people, very grassroots people, sing Hasim Bonanga in this context was very painful.
I want to add to that, uncanny, but to me appropriate, because I believe it was during one of his trials that he had said, or when he gave, I believe, the most eloquent speech, and he said, I'm going to paraphrase, that he will fight against whether it's a white government or a black government. So you're singing these struggle songs or songs of struggle against the black government. I don't think it contradicts what Nelson Mandela himself would have stood for, and it leaves me with a very an indescribable taste in my mouth as you describe your sentiments that here is the first black president who lies in state in a state that wanted him dead, and now his own people, the black government doesn't have the logistical support. I wonder how much of that is logistical support, how much is insensitivity, how much is tone deafness. I don't know. Only time and history will help us understand, unravel this mystery. But it is an irony, unfortunately a painful one. Kojo, there is a quote, money won't create success. The freedom to make it will. Do you believe this is so?
Sorry, can you say the quotes again? I didn't get it.
It said money wouldn't create success. The freedom to make it will.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on. But there's more to it than that, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, success is also an attitude.
Right.
You know, money is often, and money, and then if you conceive money as resources are necessary, but I think attitude and perspective are even more important. You know, we've had, and I use the black community as an example, lots of people who made lots of money. You know, think of, you know, either boxers or football players or whatever. But haven't necessarily been successful if you define success as building something which lasts. You know, and that for me is success. Success has to endure. Success has to transcend, you know, any life or any period of time. And in that respect, money certainly is not enough.
Mm-hmm. Kojo, can I ask you a few rapid fire questions?
Sure.
Just rapid fire. How do you think most South Africans will want to remember him?
As that father who, while he didn't necessarily give all of himself to the family, certainly stood for a better future for the family.
And Kwanele, you? How do you think, how would you want to remember him personally?
A father who gave me back a sense of who I am, which is the greatest gift. I'm very sure of my identity, thanks to him, what he fought for.
Another rapid fire one. Of all the things he taught us, what resonated the most with you?
For me, it's humility. So when I listening to the stories, you know, particularly when you speak to members of his family, and I'm fortunate enough to spend a fair amount of time with them. That for me, at the very and you know, earlier I said, you know, we should each take away something. Well, you know, I've been doing a lot of personal reflection, and you know, one of the things I want to do is to become a lot more humble.
Yeah, humility, compassion.
Humility and compassion. And
just a very broad, open heart. Yeah.
And Kwanele, after 27 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela was released in February 1990. Can you describe, however brief, the mood of the country and your personal feelings at the time? Well, I think you've spent a lot of time on the mood of the country, but your personal feelings at the time when that happened.
I pointed out earlier that I was studying in Connecticut. And this moment was not expected, or then you heard very suddenly that he's going to be released. And sitting in a student dorm in Connecticut in the US and watching him come out with Winnie Mandela holding his hand, and to the sounds of Brahim Masekela's music. Bring back Nelson Mandela, bring him home, bring him back home. Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps again. It was a beautiful moment.
In the chat room, Desiree asked, how does Mandela motivate you to be a more courageous woman?
Just that legacy of service to others, of the moral, reflection. I've been reflecting a lot about me not taking more from the world, more than I need. Just if we each took just what we needed and allowed for compassion and sharing. So that's what I carry forward, and I hope the rest of the world, in remembrance of him, we would reflect on how we consume as individuals and how it impacts others.
For those people who are comparing him with Zuma, is that a fair comparison?
With whom?
Zuma. Is that a fair comparison?
No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
For either character, to be quite honest,
the
contexts are very different, etc.
And I'm very surprised. I've never heard of people comparing Mr. Nelson Mandela to President Zuma.
It's interesting what you would hear from time to time. The outpouring of emotion has been incredible, and we have seen a new face of South Africa. What is next for this nation?
We return him home and we come back and refocus, recommit, and carry the legacy forward.
And how do you think South Africa...
In a tangible way, we're going to elections. Do we keep electing on the basis of historical sentiment, or are we going to start electing leaders in terms of what they can tangibly give to the country in terms of accountability, ethics, vision, and just driving this nation forward?
And how do you think South Africans will adjust to not having him in the background?
I think we have adjusted. As Kojo has said, he's been just our moral glue, our elder statesman. He has not been part of our active political or social life. What his passing has done is released us to just be very honest and frank and go forward.
Solomon, it's interesting to hear Kwanele say some of these things, if only because I believe, and Kwanele and I have talked about this, that it's her generation which needs to create the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Unless the Kwaneles of this world, or let me put it positively, they have, I think, and then this is the amazing thing, the ability to really decide how that bridge is built. To decide whether or not that fireplace goes out, and we all shudder in the chill of apprehension for forever and distress, or that fire is stoked, and gradually that bridge spans our expectations and crosses our fears.
Yeah, very quickly, I feel privileged because I have a bit of the understanding of what happened before, because I lived during that time. And there's this new generation. So Kojo is right, it's the 40-something-year-old generation to 50 that are uniquely placed to help the new generation into the new future, because the old generation is gone. So we need to move forward with the new generation, but the question is, how do we give them a sense of hope? How do we make them excited about the South African miracle or dream or project, whatever you choose to call it?
I think,
and it's quite right, Simon. It's and now that I hear this interchange between yourself and Kwanele, that is crystallizing in my mind that the generation of the kind of Kwanele era are really the bridge, hey? I mean, they have that link, you know, with Utata and those, but also there's a new generation who know nothing about that past, and will need to be mentored. And you know, Selwyn, our discussion has presumed that there are any issues in the black population of South Africa. But that's not the case. Mm-hmm. You know, perhaps there's another conversation around other and very influential stakeholder groups in South Africa. Yeah, but you know, you can't do everything at once.
That is very true. As I sat here listening to you, Kwanele, being so eloquent in describing your hopes and perhaps your vision for South Africa, what visited or came upon my spirit is a hope that there is a new spark plug that will start the engine of the conversation about the past. And you mentioned it, you alluded to it when you spoke about the songs of struggle that you guys were singing against the current government. And I think, and if I may tie that into what I said about having a common pain, I think perhaps in a very ironic way, the current condition, the current behavior or acts of the government may give you that what the gift to South Africa or young South Africans, what they need, or the older South Africans, what they need to start this conversation, because pain makes very strange bedfellows, and pain gives us opportunities to do things that might not have been available. It was pain that gave Nelson Mandela so many opportunities to choose the path he chose and to be transformed into this gracious, this wonderful statesman that he became. So perhaps there is hope. Perhaps there is hope that that narrative is not lost, that it will be reintroduced into the conversation. That is just my take on it.
You said it very beautifully.
Thank you.
And I tie his pain to my cancer pain. And yes, it is pain that really focuses you and drives your passion and commitment and sense of service. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I will read another quote. I love his quotes. It always seems impossible until it's done. How does that resonate with either of you?
I was in Washington in May for my cancer advocacy work, and I belong to a Washington outfit, and we have a crazy idea of ending breast cancer by the 1st of January 2020, deadline 2020. And Senator Harkin, who's one of the big supporters of this deadline, and President Clinton stood on the Hill in a private reception area and to accept an award for his support for our work. And he stood up and said, "These are words that changed me as a young man before I became a politician." And he said, "It is impossible until it is done," by Nelson Mandela. I was the only South African in an audience of about 200. Priceless moment.
Wow.
Mm.
And you, Kojo?
You know, for me, where there's life, there's hope. You know, the human capacity for inventiveness is limitless, and the bleakness and pain and suffering are among the most compelling creators of innovation. As a black person who grew up on Bob Marley and Nelson Mandela, you know, free Nelson Mandela songs and Nkrumah, you know, quoting from Nkrumah, etc. Selwyn, for me being here is, I feel very lucky. I feel very privileged in many respects. And for me, the question is, how do I use this moment to become part of the solution and not part of the problem? How do I use the experiences I've gained and getting to know people like Kwanele? I've only met her a few days ago. How do I use these things to become personally a better person and to make a contribution? And once I believe I'm doing that, then I think there's hope. Where there's life, there's hope.
Kojo, well said. I had a question, but it is not fair to ask it now because time is upon us. And the question I had for you especially is, how would you compare post-apartheid to post-colonial Caribbean? Or
I knew you were going to go there, Solomon.
But Kojo, I have a remarkable respect for time. And I know that your answer would be eloquent and deep and thorough, and I want to do that answer. So I will leave it for another time. Perhaps you can think about it. And it's a question that I wanted to ask, but I also respect the flow, and I respect the spirit. So the conversation took a certain path. But I would ask you this though. But let me start with Kwanele first. Is there anything you would like to add, Kwanele?
Just gratitude to everybody who took part, to yourself especially for starting this conversation. Respect, brother.
You're welcome. And you Kojo?
Salwan, as Kwanele says, thanks for being part of this conversation. And I just want to encourage all your listeners and everyone who would ever, look at this conversation to ask themselves, what can I take from Mandela's life that can make me a better person?
Kojo and Kwanele, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing and for being so candid. I have learned a lot. I have learned a hell of a lot, and what you had to say was very stimulating, very thought-provoking, and it made me think of things I had not thought of before. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks as ever, Selwyn, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch.
Of course. Well, good morning, I should say again.
Yes, the sun's coming out.
I can go to bed.
All right, bye-bye.
Take care.
Good night.
Good day. Good night.
Good night.
You heard me. I said arrowhead. I love my golden arrowhead. Mama, mama, oh, Gigi,